Hello, friends. Welcome to Empty Cloud Monastery. I'm Ayasoma, and I'm here with Bhante Sudaso on my right. And tonight is Monk Chat. So your opportunity to ask any question you might like on Buddha, Dhamma, and Saṅgha, and we'll try our best to answer it.
So we can start with homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami.
Hello to a few friends that are checking in. Hello to Rick, Rebecca, Geeta, Julie, Jayanta, John, Mary, Karuna, Sleep Doc, John, Mana, Bhumika, and anyone at the end of time. Very interesting nickname. And everyone else that we see as a little number on the screen. And we have one question popping up from Rick that says, can you talk about making progress on the path toward liberation in relation to letting go of a lesser happiness for a greater happiness? Ante, would you like to say a few words on that?
Yeah. So it actually starts with acknowledging what we normally consider to be happiness. What do we normally consider to be sources of pleasure or happiness? Which for most people, if they start listing sources of pleasure, sources of happiness, then they'll list ordinary sensual things. Good food, good conversation, sensual activities of various kinds. And they'll relate to happiness in terms of ordinary pleasure of that sort. And the Buddha did say that we should acknowledge such things. We should acknowledge that there is, in fact, some degree of gratification in such ordinary pleasant activities, ordinary pleasant experiences. But he said there is something higher. There are higher forms of happiness, more refined, more satisfying, more fulfilling forms of happiness, which have fewer drawbacks and fewer disadvantages. So one of these that's a significant step up is the happiness of, for example, contentment. It's a much more refined and flawless form of happiness than the happiness of, say, a nice meal or a nice cup of tea. And then also we have things like the happiness of kindness or compassion, or the happiness that comes from recollecting one's own goodness. These are all things that are more refined and pure forms of happiness, more blameless forms of happiness. And a step up from that, we have things like the pleasure that comes through samadhi, so through deep concentration during one's meditation practice, including the jhana states. So here also the Buddha said that this is a form of happiness which is much more profound, much more reliable, much more intense, and which is completely blameless. And of course, there's the happiness of purification of mind. So with each of the stages of awakening, there's the attainment of a more and more profound happiness, which comes through the permanent liberation of the mind from defilement and delusion. So, and the reason why the Buddha spoke of letting go of lesser happiness for the sake of greater happiness is because as long as we're still fixated on lesser forms of happiness, then we will not be inclined to seek out the higher forms of happiness. So as long as the mind is still attached to sensual pleasure, for example, then it will not be easy to cultivate the happiness of contentment or the happiness of meditative concentration, and definitely not the happiness of complete awakening. So that's a few brief words on the topic. I don't know if you want to add something to that.
I think that's great. Thank you. And John asks, Can you please speak about the phenomenon of desensitization?
Desensitization.
Thank you. I'm ESL. Desensitization in our culture, as in someone sees a violent current event and has no reaction or thinks it's funny and talks about it as if it's normal. Yeah. Yeah, thank you for asking this question, John. It's very important. What comes to mind is actually the instructions of the Buddha on the nutriments. So, we have a general understanding of the type of sort of food nutriment and how it composes our body. But we have we tend to underestimate the power of anything that is not somewhat tangible, that is not like solid food. We don't take it as a nutriment, but it's actually like very, very powerful nutriment that we ingest. And so we're constantly surrounded by nutriments that we actually swallow up, goggle up, right, all the time, of this sort of formless nutriment. So it can be just by watching TV or getting on social media or just walking around actually on the streets with all the advertising. So it's very important to acknowledge, pay attention that this is in fact a nutriment, and what kind of effect does it have on the heart? What kind of effect does it have on the mind? So clearly, you're acknowledging from your question. It's already, you kind of asked the question. You also gave your answer to a certain extent, in the way that seeing a lot of violent events, being exposed to so much violence, being exposed to so much of that type of nutriment, then we're actually the result is not really wholesome. The result is something that makes the heart grow colder, makes the heart get to the near enemy of compassion, which is indifference, right? It's like, oh, it's this other kind of thing that, okay, violent thing, horrible things that happen in the world, whatever. So that's not the aim of spiritual practice. That's not something that we want to cultivate. So we have to be very, very careful with what we introduce. And when we acknowledge that, in fact, the heart has been desensitized, then it's time to, in fact, intentionally open up the heart, intentionally, do that work of elevating the heart and mind towards the Brahmaviharas, right? So one of the Brahmaviharas, obviously, it's compassion, and the other one is equanimity. And the other ones, of course, are joy and love. So we want to make sure that we uplift the mind, we uplift the heart, and we remove the nutriments that actually do the opposite, that put the heart down, that close the heart. So this is what comes to mind. I don't know if, Bhante, you have any other reflections? Okay. And of course, also the residents are welcome to ask questions at any time. And Luisa says, do you have any tips to deal with alcohol cravings when being surrounded by alcohol? I know the best way is not to be exposed to alcohol, but when out to dinner and everyone is drinking, it can be difficult to say no. Sometimes it is difficult being the only person practicing the 5 precepts in the world that celebrates doing the opposite. Actually, since I was a lay person a little bit more recently than Bhante Sudha, so maybe I'll reply to this one, which is actually a great opportunity, I have to say. That's pretty much how I stopped actually drinking was by taking the 5 precepts for not actually a lifetime commitment, but at the very beginning I was just taking it from time to time. And I remember when I was taking it and hanging out with my non-Buddhist friends and not using intoxicants, then all of a sudden, the very beginning I was having fun with my friends, and then all of a sudden everybody was intoxicated except for me. And it was really not fun. And it was really actually horrible to see the sort of decline of the conversations, of the content, and people just wasting their time. And then there was the realization of going, wow, this is what I've been doing all this time whenever I was intoxicated. It never occurred to me until now. So when we actually see things just the way they are, immediately we become uninterested, we become dispassionate, we turn away, we're like, okay, I'm done with this. Really, this is such a waste of time. Do I want to spend the rest of my life saying completely idiotic things and then dying confused? Maybe not. Living confused and then dying confused, no. So then actually that practice made me just automatically want to take the precepts as a lifelong commitment. It wasn't anymore something that I was relating to it as a constriction, but actually as a support. I was like, oh, wow, this is fantastic. Thanks to these precepts, actually, I created the conditions in order to realize what an incredible waste of time that type of habit was. So these are some thoughts. And Manal says, how does one help themselves lessen and eradicate the delusion of self-identity, please? Oh, wow. Okay, Bante.
Well, actually, the advice which we see most often in the suttas is to cultivate the recognition of impermanence. So recognizing that, first off, all of our sensations are impermanent. They're constantly changing, arising and ceasing. And everything within our bodily experience is therefore constantly arising and ceasing. And everything within our mental experience, so all of our thoughts and emotions and perceptions and ideas and so on, those are also all impermanent, all changing. So when we recognize that everything which we identify as me is impermanent and constantly changing, then it becomes clear that none of that is really who we are. It's all just temporary experiences. So not our true self, not who we really are. So this is what the Buddha recommended as a way to direct the mind towards recognizing anatta, towards recognizing the non-personal nature of experience, is through starting with recognizing impermanence. And then the mind will naturally begin to recognize, oh, if this is not stable, not permanent, not continuous, then it can't possibly be me. It's just a temporary experience.
Great, thank you. And Krenar says, I'd like to know if you can share something about something I read in a Buddhism book called A Mother and a Child Clear Light. I read this in the book Advice on Dying of the Dalai Lama.
That's, yeah, I don't know. I've never heard of this book. I don't know anything about it.
Yes, you can, Krenar, if you have more details on what exactly you're trying to ask. I don't know if it's the question is a mother and a child in clear light, but anyway. Julie says, dear Venerables, making gifts that pleases the senses feels not proper, since practicing sense restraint, yet that is what loved ones want. Any advice? Seems to keep me in this loop of giving and receiving. Oh. Well, what comes to mind, actually, I'll tell you this story of my previous life within this life. So before I was monastic, actually, before I was even practicing Buddhism. And I remember falling madly in love with this person. And actually, before meeting this person, I used to really hate gifts. But when I met this person, like my mind was so enthralled. And I remember at a certain point, I was just kind of obsessing with all the interesting sort of quirks that this person had. And so I kind of had memorized them. And so I created this, it was their birthday was coming up soon. And I remember taking so much time in finding, not buying, but finding different things to come up with sort of mementos that actually were speaking to that particular characteristic that this person had, or their likes, or their different quirks. I remember putting so much time in crafting this gift and then giving it to this person. This person was so happy. They were like, wow, this is the best gift I've ever had. And I was like full of joy before, during, and after. And I remember thinking, wow, I'm so in love with this person. And then I was like, after a while, I'm like, actually, I'm very in love with how this person makes me feel. And then I was like, actually, I'm very in love with, very much happy with this feeling of doing something really loving.
Mm-hmm.
And fast forward to monastic life. Actually, at a certain point, I remember meeting a good friend of Bhante Sudaza, who is now also a very good friend of mine, Ajahn Kavya. And I remember him giving me this gift. It was like really this plastic little tube with a needle and some thread in it. And then to Bhante Sudaza, another really kind of funky little thing of recycled stuff. But I was so much in need of needle and thread. And Bhante Sudaza was so much in need of, I can't remember what it was for you. And it was just so thoughtful and so remarkable. And I remember going like, wow, what an incredible, thoughtful person this monk is. He's so adorable. Ajahn Kavilo, if you have the chance to meet him, it's just such a remarkable human being. And I remember thinking, oh, wow, this is that quality. You know, we tend to think this person makes me feel this way, or that person makes me feel that way. But actually, it's that gesture that is so wholesome, brings so much wholesomeness, right? So when we relate to gift giving in that way, then it becomes something different, becomes part of practice. It doesn't become anymore that chore, like, oh, okay, now I have to go to the mall and like buy whatever type of junk thing that I'm going to package and like give it to this person who is going to put it in the basement and then recycle it at the next Christmas, whatever extravaganza, right? So that, yeah, that's, that really puts a weight on the heart. But actually, this other type of giving where we really start nurturing a different type of thoughtfulness, a different type of eye, a different type of heart, well, that's very much in line with Dhamma. That really uplifts ourselves, and we can do it towards anyone. So as monastics, then it's so beautiful because then we don't have the kind of clingy, romantic, or all that dodgy stuff, and we kind of just and we also don't have money, so it's incredible. We can only like really make makeshift little gifts. And even when we receive gifts that we don't like, we're constantly like, oh yeah, this is great, oh, I hate chocolate, but Bhante doesn't like chocolate. Finally, I have a gift for Bhante. That's lovely, right? So everything becomes an opportunity. So as lay people, we can see how we can take these opportunities for practice. And Dhanadaza Chan says, when one enters the stream, this corresponds to breaking the first 3 fetters. When the fetter of doubt is broken, does faith become unshakable and shift from a spiritual faculty to a spiritual power? Okay.
Yeah, so with stream entry, yes, one's faith becomes unshakable. This is one of the characteristics of a stream enter, is that they have unshakable faith in Buddha, Dhamma, and Saṅgha. So yes, I think it's legitimate to say that at that point it's a spiritual power. It's something which gives a tremendous amount of strength to one's spiritual practice. But I would also say that it's possible to cultivate faith to the point of a spiritual power also prior to stream entry. It just won't necessarily have the same force and intensity that it does for a stream enterer. And it's actually worth deliberately building up that sense of trust and confidence and faith in Buddha, Dhamma, and Saṅgha, because this is something which really does support and uplift our practice.
Thank you, Bhante. And Hasanta asks, if we're constantly forming each instant based on the 5 khandhas, and there is nothing else, what can remember past lives, as there is nothing from that past life still here in this moment? Ante, do you want to answer this too, since the previous one was very easy?
Hasanta, I would give you a counter question. What is it that remembers 1 second ago? If you can answer that question, then you also can answer what is it that remembers past lives. Like we actually don't think it's particularly exceptional to remember something that happened 1 second ago, but actually that is exceptional. That is remarkable. But we take it as ordinary. We take it as a given. But actually remembering past lives is no different. It's just farther back and more difficult, but it's the same faculty of memory. So each moment is an individual arising. That's one way of talking about it. And it's an individual arising based upon the conditions present in the previous moment. And that moment was an arising based upon the conditions of the previous moment, and so on. So one can trace back that chain of conditions. So just as you can see whatever's currently going on in your mind is the result of actions you made earlier today. In the same way, you can reflect back farther and farther and start to see, oh, I have a habit of thinking this way because I've been doing it for most of my life, or I have these memories because of such and such things that happened in my life. So you can see, like, your current experience is arising because of the conditions created in the past. So therefore, you can infer the past based upon your current conditions. So past life recall actually works exactly the same as yesterday recall. Past life memories is the same as remembering this morning or remembering 5 seconds ago. It's exactly the same function. It's not different.
Thank you, Bante. And Dhanadatta actually had a follow-up on the previous question. I have heard others say that the first 3 fetters are broken simultaneously. Is this accurate?
It's usually talked about that way. I don't know off the top of my head if it actually directly states that in the suttas. I can't remember right now if it actually directly states that anywhere. But these 3 fetters are, again, the 3 things that a stream enterer has overcome. And they are all interrelated. So the aspect of skepticism is that one still has a certain amount of doubt about the accuracy of the Buddha's teachings. But when one has directly seen for oneself that this body mind is not me, not mine, not who I am, then one is confirming that the Buddha was right. When the Buddha taught anatta, non-self, the Buddha was right. So then with that confirmation of this central pinnacle of Buddhist doctrine, the central foundation of Buddhist doctrine, then one has overcome doubt. And one recognizes that this overcoming of doubt was not through doing particular ceremonies or following particular modes of procedure, like particular ways of doing things, but rather it was through cultivating a direct, wise examination of one's own experience. So then also this misunderstanding of spiritual practices also disappears. One understands that the purpose of spiritual practice is to aid in this self-examination and direct realization of anicca, dukkha, anatta. So yes, these 3 are all bound together. So once you unravel one, you're naturally unraveling all 3 of them. This is how it's normally spoken about anyway.
Okay, thank you, Bante. And Hasanta asks, I understand that meditation itself generates good karma vipaka. Is that right? Is that due to intention to meditate or something inherent to the meditation itself, please? I would say both, of course. Having the intention to meditate and following through is pretty great. It's both good karma at the beginning and during and after, since you're following through. And the meditation itself, of course, you're cultivating the mind. So that's the most important thing. So actually following through and really taking the time to, remove all greed, remove all hatred, remove all delusion. So even if you actually get 1% created out in this lifetime, that's incredible. That's marvelous. That's huge, incredible result. So it's absolutely fantastic. What is karma? Essentially, it's an action with intention, and vipaka is the result. And Sud says, not Suda, but Sud. Venerable, the other day I was severely ill. Oh, I'm sorry to hear. Without any way out, I listened to the Ratana Sutta. As I was listening, a certain type of joy and calmness came over, and I was fine the rest of the day. Oh, beautiful. Are there any references in the suttas where thinking about the Buddha makes somehow get blessed and basically overcome whatever thing is bothering us? Or is this just wishful thinking on my part? No, actually, it is full of in the suttas to recollect Buddha, Dhamma, and Saṅgha. And actually, even the Forest Masters, there are some beautiful stories of Ajahn Chah, for example, the Forest Master, that is very well known in the West. When he was doing his tudongs, and perhaps he was in the middle of the forest at night, and he would have some kind of encounters with wild animals, and we're talking about tigers and wild elephants. That actually the wild elephants are even more dangerous than the tigers, because they apparently, even though we think that elephants are this sweet, cute animal, they're a little bit crazy. So they're a little bit moody, and they will attack you out of the blue for no reason. Even bears are a lot more chilled, but elephants, not so much. So when he would have these encounters, what he would do is he would start recollecting the Buddha, the qualities of the Buddha, actually. So the Itipiso, and that would soothe the heart. I actually also tried it, not with the wild elephants, but with the wild boars that are completely like they don't do anything actually, but for some reason I'm completely terrified of wild boars. So when we were doing our Tudong practice, I started doing precisely that, just chanting the Tipiso, so recollecting the incredible qualities of Buddha, Dhamma, and Saṅgha, and it does work. Yeah, it's just really. I also started doing the practice that also Ajahn Chah recommends, which is basically just reflecting that, if we've done any karma in the past, that the result of the vipaka, it has to be that we're going to be attacked by the wild animal, then so be it. So so doing that, all right, I'm gonna die. So that also can help sometimes. And Philos Eterno says, watching the rain gives me joy, but remembering that the same rain is probably causing discomfort for the homeless makes me lose that joy. How do I deal with this? Dante?
Well, first off, recognize that you have compassion for those who are suffering. So appreciate your own compassion. That's a really wonderful thing to have. Then it might also get you thinking, what can I do that will help the homeless? So maybe there's an organization that you can donate to or volunteer for that helps to alleviate conditions for homeless people. So ask yourself, what can I do in order to help to reduce the suffering of those who suffer? But also recognizing that rain is, in fact, a critically important aspect of the ecosystem. Without rain, we would all die. So appreciating the fact that the rain is falling is actually perfectly fine. And even using the rain as a meditation object, actually some of the most delightful meditation sessions I've had were during times when it was raining heavily outside. The sound of the rain can be a powerful support to one's samadhi practice. So you can still enjoy the sound of the rain. You can still enjoy, definitely appreciate how the rain nourishes life all over the planet. It's a critically important aspect of nature. And as for your compassion for the homeless, well, then do something to help the homeless. See what you can do in order to be of benefit.
Thank you, Bante. And Krenar says, additional information about my question, the one on the Dalai Lama. The book states, the child clear light is generated by having cultivated the spiritual oath achieved by the yogi's exertion in early meditation. The meeting of the mother and child clear light is not actually a meeting of two entities, rather the mother clear light of death, which dawns due to karma, turns into a spiritual consciousness. The child clear light, this is the meeting of the mother and the child clear light. Not sure if you can elaborate on this.
I have no idea. Yeah, completely lost.
It reminded me of why I actually got into Theravada. I actually love, our friends in the Mahayana and Vajrayana tradition, but sometimes like it can get a little bit convoluted and complex, and I like the simplicity, the teachings, the early teachings. So I don't think we're the best people to ask, but maybe actually if you tune in with the friends of Shravasti Abbey, I know that they do live streams also on a regular basis. So Tupten Chodron's place, and also Ken Modralma, incredible teacher, monastic teacher that lives in Maine. She also does on a regular basis teachings online. So I think these monastics are much better suited than us.
Yeah, I mean, just from what it sounds like that's a metaphorical way of speaking, but they're not metaphors that I'm familiar with because they're not from the Buddhist traditions that I've studied. So, but if you, as Ayasoma was recommending, if you do talk to experienced monastics from the Tibetan tradition, they probably will recognize these metaphors and be able to explain them to you.
And then Vivek says, in your Nibbana talk, so Snaz, I think this is you, you mentioned focusing our mind towards states of bliss if we find ourselves losing interest in normal daily life behaviors. How do I cultivate these states via my practice?
Well, I actually don't remember exactly what I said or what the context was, but it does look like reasonable advice.
Fortunate.
It does sound like something I probably said something similar to at some point. So focusing the mind towards states of bliss if we find ourselves losing interest in normal daily life behaviors. What's wrong with losing interest in normal daily life behaviors? I'm actually not sure that's a problem. But focusing the mind towards bliss, yeah, that's always a good idea, actually. Yeah, I mean, basically every moment, make every moment a happy moment. Every moment can be a moment of serene joy. It never needs to be otherwise. Anytime we're suffering, it's because we're choosing to suffer. There's no need to ever choose to suffer. You can always choose to be serenely happy. And as for losing interest in normal daily life behaviors, well, again, the question is why? So for some people, they lose interest in normal daily life behaviors because of severe clinical depression, in which case there's a problem going on and you should probably go and talk to a professional about it. And other people, it's just because they're cultivating a deeper understanding of the nature of reality, and they're recognizing that the limited pleasure that comes through ordinary activities is actually not particularly good. And instead, there's a much more refined form of happiness, which comes through cultivating one's spiritual practice. So this is instead the aspect of disenchantment, of nibbida, of losing one's interest in ordinary worldly pleasures because one has some experience of a higher form of happiness through spiritual practice. But if you don't have that experience of a higher form of happiness and you're losing interest in ordinary daily life things, that sounds more like a problem of, it might be more of a psychological depression problem. But yeah, it is important to actively cultivate joy in one's practice, to train the mind to appreciate and enjoy every single waking moment, especially when there's nothing interesting going on. So learning how to be totally happy staring at a blank wall. Actually, I love staring at blank walls. It's very pleasant.
Great, thank you. And John says, can you please share a story regarding a time when your presence as a monk helped someone or changed their life for the better, for inspiration in the practice? Actually, I like how you phrased the question in when your presence. Sometimes actually all is needed is the presence of a monastic. We tend to think that we have to do so many complicated things, like teachings, Dharma talks, live streams, all sorts of things. But actually, remember when I really had the sense of the power of the sign of the samana, essentially, of the sign of just like the presence, the seeing a monastic in the world. So something that has nothing to do with the individual monastic, doesn't have to do with being Ajahn such and such, or Tan such and such, or Bhante such and such, or Aya such and such, but rather just this robe, the ochre robe, this form of renunciation was when I joined this charika, this walk with Tansutam, a Thai monk that actually does this really brutal practice of walking like 50 kilometers every day, which I don't know how many miles that is, 30?
30 miles
30 miles or so. And it's brutal, but it's really powerful at the same time, because he will just walk and walk and walk. And while you're walking in so many different places, different neighborhoods. Sometimes there's nature, sometimes there's just cement. And I remember when we actually did this walk we started in Manhattan and we walked all the way to Pennsylvania. He continued, I went back, but that's a different story. But going from Manhattan to New Jersey, then we started walking in lots of different neighborhoods. Some were really pretty, and then we actually went into places where nobody ever walks in, and they were full of desperation, actually, of people that were going through so many different difficulties, drug addiction, homelessness, lots of poverty, and a lot of dukkha, like real dukkha. And so there were many people either sleeping on the street or intoxicated or just having a hard time with mental health issues. But there was also a lot of social services. So a lot of people with nonprofits and helping, providing material needs, food or medicine or different things. And at a certain point, it was 4 of us, 4 monastics, 2 bhikkhus and 2 bhikkhunis. And I was one of the bhikkhunis. And we were just walking. We appeared. And we started walking and walking. And all of a sudden, I remember clearly, like it was yesterday, like all these folks that, were just started, lifting up their gaze and seeing the sign of the samana, the sign of these monastics coming, and their face shifting from this extreme dukkha to this extreme happiness and wonder and surprise and hope and And they started greeting us, and we would have all these folks going like, wow, oh, thank God, oh, you're so beautiful. And I remember turning around and going, no, you are beautiful. And they're like, no, you are beautiful. And all of a sudden, these streets that, that had all this broken glass shattered, all this anxiety, all this dukkha, were all uplifted. But it had nothing to do with Ayasoma or Tansutam or Ayasada or Bhante Sulita. Like, it had nothing to do with us individual monastics, but it had to do with this form that the Buddha gave us. And that sense of hope that there is something else to the predicament that one is living. That was such a powerful teaching. Like, all those people taught me. Also, while I was walking there, I had a big sense of samsara, actually. So it also helped me understand more, this form. And I remember thinking, back in the day, you were a monastic and you crossed by and you gave me, you showed me the sign of the samana, and thank you. And I hope this will also bring you the same happiness now that I am giving you back, this sign of the samana, that will bring you, uplift you from this sort of misery. So it was really profound in so many ways. And yeah, I also learned the presence. And also when we do the tudong, actually, when we do our charika, and especially in Italy, because we walk everywhere, and people have no idea who we are. And when we do our alms round, and when folks understand that we don't handle money, and that we have all these different rules, and that we only accept food, makes people so happy, and they start thanking us like for so long. Like, oh, thank you so much. They're not Buddhist. They could care less about Buddhism, but they're just so happy that there are people that are holding these precepts of renunciation. And so sometimes just by acting in accordance with Dhamma, one brings so much benefit, so much happiness to this world. And so, yeah, once again, even there, it's I didn't make up the precepts. I didn't make up this sort of holy life. The Buddha did, and it's really beautiful to see how powerful it is.
Yeah.
Do you want to share?
No, that's beautiful.
Okay, thank you. And anyone at the end of time says, have you ever met any teachers from the forest tradition, such as Ajahn Amaro or Ajahn Sumedho? Well, yes and yes, I guess.
I mean, well, given that I was trained in the Ajahn Chah forest tradition, then yes, I have met many teachers from the forest tradition. In fact, it would not be a stretch to say I am a teacher from the forest tradition. So actually, every time I look in the mirror, I'm meeting a teacher from the forest tradition. And yes, I've met both Ajahn Amaro and Ajahn Sumedho, as well as countless others. Ajahn Pasano, my preceptor, of course. Ajahn Suchito. I mean, and if I start listing names, I'll be here all night. Yeah, I've met pretty much all of the well-known Western Ajahns at one point or another.
And Sud says, the illness was actually a physical stomach illness, which sort of went away as I was in recitation of the Ratana Sutta. Not sure the weird way this happened. Not sure if it was wishful thinking on my part. I love your skepticism. Let's call it miracle of the Dhamma. Come on. We have to stop with this like scientific materialism. It's really like so 2008. Let's embrace the power of spirituality. Yes.
It's also interesting, the skepticism, even in the face of direct experience.
Hanging out with the Catholics, I have to say, made me a little bit, opened up the heart a little bit. I was like, yeah, it's cool. The saints have a lot of the spiritual powers also that are described in the canon. It's very remarkable. And you start going like, come on. SA says, dear Venerables, Buddha says desire and attachment lead to suffering. Humans need healthy attachment in infancy to do well. I feel I care too much for a toxic family. I'm laughing because I was not foreseeing that. Feels like trauma bonded cords.
Well, we need to be careful with terminology here. So one huge error that I've seen a lot of people fall into is they equate terms from Buddhism with terms from Western psychology and assume that they mean the same thing. And this actually comes up with the word attachment. So I actually don't know enough about modern Western psychology to really speak about it, but I know enough to know that the word attachment has a very different meaning in contemporary Western psychology than it does in Buddhism. So I would just say that right from the start. When you talk about healthy attachment in infancy, that sounds like a concept from contemporary Western psychology, which doesn't have anything to do with what the Buddha is talking about. Actually, someone was explaining it recently that when they talk about attachment, it's more about caring. It's more about having a genuine caring affection for your infants, for your children, for example. And so in Buddhism, we would actually say, yes, actually, caring, kindness, compassion, those are good things. Taking care of your children, that's a good thing. Actually, the Buddha said that's one of the highest blessings, is to take care of your children. So if that's what you mean by attachment, then actually that's not a bad thing in Buddhism. That's actually a manifestation of wholesome states of mind. And it's also doubtful whether there's any specific Pali word which actually translates directly as attachment. There's a few Pali words which commonly get translated that way, but that's not necessarily the best English word. The most common one is upadana, but actually I think for upadana, grasping is a much more accurate word. So it's the action of trying to acquire and maintain an experience. Attachment is an aspect of that in the sense of an unwillingness to let go of something. So if by attachment you mean an unwillingness to let go, then yeah, that would qualify as an unwholesome mind state, something which generates suffering. So again, we need to be careful with definition of terms here, especially when we start overlapping different fields of thought, different thought worlds. The thought world of early Buddhism is quite a bit different from the thought world of contemporary Western psychology. So we need to be careful to define our terminology and make sure that we're not mixing up different concepts under the same word. Okay.
Okay, thank you, Bhante. And Rick asks, can you talk about how to apply looking at the gratification, drawback, and escape as a way to let go of a strong craving? I use this practice to finally let go after 17 failed attempts by self-will. Yeah. Self-will. No, doesn't work that way. Yeah, we need to create the causes and conditions in order to be able to achieve the intent, right? That's actually a very important teaching of anatta on an experiential level. You know, when we're like, so forcefully, I'm gonna like quit smoking, and then you get another cigarette and you start smoking again. That's because actually it's very different to have that sort of I am able to do this, as opposed to understanding that there needs to be causes and conditions put in place in order for that to accomplish quitting smoking, or to accomplish just not getting an addiction to smoking. So speaking of smoking, actually, I was talking to Bhante the other day about an interesting thing. When I was a lay person, I actually never managed to get an addiction. And I was reflecting with Bhante. I was like, what's that the case? And I thought, it occurred to me, I think it's because I always did this practice of, now I have the wording for it, to look at the gratification, the danger, and the escape. So the gratification was always very clear to me. Otherwise, I wouldn't be doing the action that I was doing, right? So actually, I used to be a smoker. Smoking more is on the vibhava tanha. It's like craving for non-existence. It's very sweet. It's like, yes. Right? So there's a clear gratification for anyone who has smoked. And there was a time where I was smoking quite a lot. But also, if I had finished my pack of cigarettes and I really wanted another cigarette, it was also very clear to me the drawback of having to go down late at night. It was cold, and I had to go and find a deli that was open, and there's a lot of different steps. So I was like, all right, maybe I'll smoke if it's like easier. Maybe tomorrow if I'm like stopping by, I'm like on my way somewhere, and then I'll go to the store. But actually, to go right now all the way there and having to go through all this hassle, maybe actually what is really much sweeter than the cigarette is letting go of that desire altogether. So that's where we find the escape. So even as an asuttava patugera, I managed to do that, probably maybe from some previous practice. So I was still doing the unwholesome thing, which was not in accordance with Dhamma, but there was a sense that prevented me, right? There was a sense of the danger which prevented me from getting that addiction. And so with anything, if we really thoroughly embrace, not skipping also the gratification and just focusing on the danger, but acknowledging the gratification. Obviously, this thing is good. Otherwise, there must be something that I'm getting out of it. Otherwise, I wouldn't be so crazy to partake in this. So acknowledging that, and then looking at what are the drawbacks. What is it? Also paying attention to that dukkha vedana. Being lazy at doing something that is unskillful is actually quite good. We want to save that energy for things that instead are wholesome. But yeah, laziness in smoking, yeah, that's probably a good type of laziness to to encourage, right? Laziness in meditation, no, but laziness in smoking, yes. And then we can train ourselves by pushing ourselves, basically using that as a trampoline. Is that Italian? Is that English? Like a starting point? Yeah. Yeah. A trigger, right? To then find the way out of letting go of the desire instead of chasing, like trying to get the object. And Krenar asks, what is the most inspiring book you've read? If you can both share your title, we're going to be super boring as usual. Bante, we have the same one, we know.
Sutta Pitaka. That was easy.
Exactly.
Yeah, predictable.
Joseph says, Venerables, reading the Akanka Sutta, the heart calms, knowing if we never meet again in this life, I will honor your kindness by growing these 5 practices. Any advice for developing Yoniso Manasikara?
Yeah, constantly reflect on causality, on the consequences of every choice that you make. Yeah, then naturally we will make wise choices. And actually, the Buddha's recommendation for Yoniso Manasikara is to constantly consider the 4 Noble Truths and how the 4 Noble Truths apply in each moment of our life. Yeah, so those are my recommendations.
And Hasanta says, it's a follow-up from the previous question. I guess what I'm asking is, how do we remember 1 second ago as well if we're only the 5 khandhas? There's nothing from the previous 5 khandhas a second ago still there. Isn't that right?
Because these 5 khandhas arose based upon the previous set of 5 khandhas. And that arose based upon the previous set of 5 khandhas and so on. So it's like a chain. Each link is separate, but each link is connected to the previous one. So based upon the current condition, you can extrapolate the previous condition. You can infer the previous condition.
And SA says, seems there is healthy attachment or right attachment, metta, love, loving kindness, etc. Along with detachment, is it detaching from wrong things? This is also follow-up.
Okay, I actually recommend SA. I recommend just not using the words attachment or detachment. Just don't use those words at all, because again, it's just going to cause this whole confusion of getting mixed up with how these words are used in psychology. Just don't use those words at all.
Detach from attachment.
Detach from the word attachment anyway. Yeah, just don't use those words, because it's just going to generate confusion.
Great. Julie asks, how does one recognize cessation in comparison to blacking out? Is it a surge of energy that arises after cessation? I mean, I would say that. Is there any knowing and clear seeing with blacking out? No. So I wouldn't get like too psychedelic with a surge of energy and this and that and too complicated, but really clear knowing, clear seeing. That's recognizing cessation. And Rick says, I celebrated 29 years of sobriety in AA, 27 years in AI.
Al-Anon.
I don't know what that is.
I actually... But no, AA is Alcoholics Anonymous. Al-Anon is another organization that's similar but different, but I don't know what the differences are.
Okay. And 1 year of not drinking diet soft drinks. Sadhu, 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 Rick. We are cheering for you. What an inspiration. Incredible. Yeah. And John asks, at what level of the mind do Lobha, Dosa, and Moha exist? Why are they not listed in the Khandhas? Bhante?
Well, actually, I would say that they're included under Saṅgha Khanda, though other people define the word Saṅgha in a much more restrictive way than I understand it. But as far as I can tell, that would be included under Saṅgha Khanda. So they are most definitely are included in the 5 Khandhas. What's it called? In one strain of Mahayana philosophy, they have the idea of what they call the Alaya Vijnana, the storehouse consciousness, which is a specific aspect of the Vijnana Khanda, which contains within it also the tendencies towards defilement and delusion. So with that categorization system, these would be included under the Vijnana Khanda. But as far as I can tell, within the system of the early discourses, it's included under Saṅgha Khanda.
Excellent. Oh, and Joe is asking for blessing for Geshe Dadul. I don't know if you've heard Bhante. It was Geshe that got lost at Shirasti Abbey. I'm so sorry to hear that. Yeah, he passed away. Yes, absolutely. Thank you for asking, Joe.
Yeah, we can do blessings for them at the next puja.
Yeah. And John, is Nibbana something in us we become aware of, or is it a state resulting from practice? Okay.
Well, I mean, you can actually talk about it in either way. So one way of talking about Nibbana is that Nibbana is a basic, pervasive aspect of reality, which we become aware of through practice. So that's one way of talking about it. Another way is that Nibbana is the state in which the mind is permanently free of greed, hatred, and delusion. So in that way, you can say it's a state resulting from practice. So either way can be true, depending upon how one wants to speak about it.
And Julie says, have you ever needed to go an alms round on your own, no other monastics? Why is it scary the first time? Yes, we have had to go our separate ways. Sometimes actually even when we go Pinapata together, sometimes we part ways and then meet again. Was it scary the first time? I gotta say yes. Yeah, actually when I had first ordained, actually even when I was in the company of others, I was a little bit, it was a little bit of a struggle for me. I think also as women, we're very socialized at giving, but nobody really socializes us at receiving. So it occurred to me when I became a monastic that it was really difficult for me to receive. So I was mortified the entire time. And on top of that, I could also not use money and I could not like repay the person back. So I was full of paranoia and neurosis. So actually, I really needed this practice. I was really grateful for the wisdom of the Buddha. Like, oh, okay, I've got the giving part down. Like I really enjoyed, offering food to monastics or providing, but I was having a really hard time with that. But then after a while, you really let go of yourself, like stop taking yourself too seriously, and then you start understanding that people are not offering to you, ayasoma, unworthy, worthy being, but rather that you are embodying this form that is the form of the Saṅgha, so a vehicle of merit at large. So it has nothing to do with you. So once one understands that, then whether one is alone or in the company of others, one also understands that we're all capable of growing our own food and cooking, and like we can be autonomous, right? So actually it takes much more time and effort to go alms round or to live the alms mendicant life. So there is a purpose to this, and we see that the Buddha actually in the early teachings, the early communities, the way that he crafted it is really as a symbiotic practice between lay people and monastics. And so in this way, we all can practice generosity. We can all practice contentment. We can all practice renunciation. So it's really beautiful. It's really wonderful. And when we take it in with that understanding that it has nothing to do with gaining, but it has to do with relinquishment, with moderation, with all these aspects of the path, and it's all really beautiful. And Dante, do you want to share?
That's good.
Okay.
I mean, I've gone alms round many, many times, both alone and with others. I actually don't remember my first time. It was a really long time ago.
He wasn't scared, clearly.
And the very first time I went into public wearing robes, I was extremely self-conscious and nervous. But that wasn't the first time I went alms round. It was just the first time I went in public wearing robes. But I got over that fairly quickly.
Great. We're glad. And John says, what is your opinion on the Buddhist response to climate concerns?
Well, compassion is a very important part of Buddhist practice. So, of course, anthropogenic climate catastrophe is something that causes a lot of harm, a lot of suffering to a lot of sentient beings. And cultivating a more compassionate approach is something which will reduce the suffering that's caused to sentient beings. So it's definitely within the domain of Buddhist practice to try to do something to help the climate crisis. But it's important to do so with a wholesome mind, to do so with the sufficient attitude of kindness, compassion, and equanimity.
Vivek is following up. To clarify, during your talk, there was a comment made by a viewer saying that they feared losing the pleasant things in life. You advised to cultivate euphoric bliss during meditation. I don't know how. You said that if we don't, we could potentially sink into depression. At times, a good friend and I feel like this. How do I clearly cultivate this bliss via my practice? Thank you for clarifying.
Okay, understood. Because the point is that if one is losing interest in ordinary pleasures, but one does not have something else, something more refined, more enjoyable to fall back on, then yeah, the mind can slip into depression because it feels like you're losing your basis of happiness. Yeah, so actively cultivating bliss during meditation practice. One of the most direct ways to do this is to enjoy the sensations of your body. So we all have the power to perceive sensations as pleasant if we wish to. So perceive your body sensations as pleasant. Find something while you're doing meditation, practicing mindfulness of the body, find something about your body sensation that's enjoyable and focus on enjoying it, enjoying the pleasantness of body mindfulness. Or whatever your meditation object is. But since mindfulness of the body is what I normally use, this is how I normally speak. Yeah, so actively cultivate an enjoyment of your meditation object. Again, especially with mindfulness of the body. And naturally, that will tend to make your meditation practice more pleasant, more joyful. And also that makes it easier to keep a sense of joy in daily life. Also, actively cultivate contentment, appreciation of the bliss of contentment, of not wanting anything, of not hating anything. And also constantly recollect your own goodness, reminding yourself of your own morality, self-restraint, kindness, and generosity, which also, of course, depends upon actually practicing kindness and generosity. So you have something to recollect. So if you're thinking, I'm trying to recollect my generosity, but I can't think of anything. Well, maybe that means you need to do some acts of generosity. So you have something to recollect. Yeah, these are all things which help a lot. A recollection of Buddha, Dhamma, and Saṅgha also tends to bring a lot of happiness and joy to the mind. Recollection of the Devas is another one that the Buddha recommended. I gave a talk about that a couple weeks ago. Yeah, these are all things that help.
Okay. And Dana Dasa asked you, Loba, Tanha, and Raga have the same meaning. There must be subtle differences in meaning, which I imagine must be inferred from the context. Would you like to answer that?
Yes, there are subtle differences in meaning. I mean, how much time do you have? So loba, greed, yeah, greed is relatively fine as a translation of that. Tanha, thirst or craving, yeah. Raga, passion or lust, yeah. Yeah, they all have subtly different shades of meaning. But if one is just trying to get the general thrust of the Dhamma, then these minor differences are actually not that important. They're all just different aspects of the same unwholesome tendency of mind, but they're not that dramatically different from each other. So I wouldn't get too hung up on the precise differences between these terms. It's not really that important unless one is involved in translation or one is reading the suttas in Pali and want to understand specific differences between things. But otherwise, I wouldn't get too hung up on the slight differences between these words.
And Scott says, I think this is Ayasoma, not a year soma. Ayasoma, reflecting on the harm that was caused to your mother in the case of the theft and your response of compassion for me, it is enraging to consider harm coming to my parents. How did you get to the stage where compassion arose so readily? I think you're talking about what I mentioned the other week during the talk. So for those who don't know, my parents had a caregiver that was more of a caretaker in the sense that was carrying a lot to take. So in 3 months, she stole a lot of things. And so I was, can't remember in which context I was sharing this story. But yeah, it was very interesting to me that it was one of my success stories in practice. I have some a lot of not success stories in practice, but a few success stories in practice. And this was one of the success stories of actually not having any resentment towards her, but actually full compassion. even though she gaslighted my mom in particular, since my mom is having some problems lately, and yeah, and ultimately also caused a lot of harm to my dad, who passed away actually 2 months ago. So yeah, in a worldly sense, one can think, yeah, there's so many reasons to get angry, but actually there was no anger in me in regards to her in particular, because there was full understanding of the unwholesomeness of the actions that she did and the consequences of those actions. And not only in future lives, but in that particular, like in this life, in this moment, before, during, and after. Wow, what kind of mind, what kind of heart must one have to take advantage of some of the most vulnerable people in society, like the elderly? Wow, it's really horrible to have that that condition already there, that you are willing to take advantage of anyone, but even more so someone who is clearly, in a state of vulnerability, of depression, um, of struggles, both physical and mental. Like, wow, how petty, how terrible, how low. Like, you have to actually be already in a really, really bad state. Also, to do that act, right? So it was clearly this person is part of organized crime, because actually there's a lot of the techniques that were used and also the objects that were stolen have to go through organized crime. So I thought, wow, the amounts of terrible people actually that this person is surrounded by on a regular basis. Wow, what an atrocious hell on earth. Right? That you're constantly, having to deal with people that also want to take advantage of you, that also are not looking after you, that also might harm you at any moment, right? That doesn't make you feel very comfortable and at peace. And also, after having committed the crime, yes, of course, there's all this money, and of course, there's all these like nice objects and this and that. But there's also the fear. Wow, am I going to be caught? Maybe someone wants some kind of revenge, or maybe, there's so many different things that can happen. So living with that anxiety, this lady was about like 27 or 28 years old, something like that. I remember talking to her before I knew that any of this had happened. And she was talking to me, going like, "Oh, you seem so peaceful as a monastic. I have all this incredible anxiety, and I have all these different difficulties." And I remember thinking, "Oh, yeah, that's odd." And now I think, "Whoa, wow, actually, doesn't surprise me at all." At that young age, having that clearly is the result of something that you're doing. It's not randomly there. And definitely it's only going to get worse. So if you're having those kind of symptoms that you're feeling comfortable to share with me, and you're doing all of these behaviors that are clearly going to settle the mind, yeah, it's awful. So I actually felt that she was the one who had gone through a lot of loss, as opposed to, with my mom. Actually, she had so much anxiety with all those different objects. So she still has a lot of anxiety, but now, because she knows that all those objects have disappeared, paradoxically, she's not obsessing about them anymore. So it was really a Dhamma teaching, all in all. It was like, oh wow, this is great. And then also another thing, that I never had anxiety towards objects, but I remember that since there were a few items of jewelry that came from my great-grandparents that were given to my grandparents, and that my grandparents gave to my mom, and my mom was supposed to give me. And when I became a monastic, this was a huge tragedy because I was the only female in the family back then. So it's like, oh, you're supposed to have this jewelry. So it always was a little bit like, I feel so bad to disappoint, my mom and her and my ancestors with this jewelry. And then the jewelry disappeared. I'm like, great. no problem anymore. So my mom is not obsessing about it being there or not there anymore. I'm not thinking about, how am I gonna, I hope like, it's good that my brother now has a niece, but is he going to give this jewelry to the niece, and is it going to continue in the family? Whoa, it's disappeared. So all in all, we see the stupidity of these objects and how much importance we give to them. And also, I had so much compassion also for my parents that they stored. I had no idea that they had stored all this crazy stuff in that house. And why did I not know? Because they never enjoyed it. It was there. Right? It's not that this jewelry, for example, that I was supposed to inherit, like my mom was going to the galas with this jewelry. No, it was there in the safe. And so we put so much importance to all of these different objects, which can immediately disappear. And even if they are not stolen, eventually we'll have to be separated from them, right? So what's the whole point? So what is the true inheritance? I lost my dad, and at a certain point I inherited from him, and as I inherited, then I also disowned myself, like I renounced the inheritance. And I renounced, yes, I don't have the material inheritance anymore, but I definitely have so much. I don't feel like I disowned myself. Like I feel like there's the true inheritance is all the really good, wholesome things that I learned from my parents. And those nobody can steal. That can't be removed. But all those, physical things, everything can either be destroyed or stolen or whatever. So you start seeing and understanding what is important. So then I feel like the person who really stole, who really lost something is the person who stole. So it's not a brainy thing. It wasn't like, I just want to be compassionate. I just want to be compassionate. Don't be angry at this person. But rather it was like, wow, must be really difficult to be in that situation. Wow, that's difficult to bear. I already have a little bit of dukkha. But I also realized I have a little dukkha, not that humongous dukkha. Right? Wow, like here at the monastery, everybody's so sweet and kind and loving. Even the cat is nice. So yeah, I'm never thinking, no, someone is going to stab me in the back or do this or that. So wow, so peaceful, but not the other person. So this is how I succeeded. And Celestino says, any attachment or clinging or desire for needs to be understood and overcome. However, is it right to say that if it is towards the causes, then it is wholesome, like right speech or right evaluation or right discernment, for example, while if it's towards the results, then it is not, like nibbana or no more births, for example?
No, I don't agree. Having desire for nibbana is great. Yeah, keep that desire. That's a good one. No, being attached to the Noble Eightfold Path and having desire for awakening, that's all really good stuff. Those are the kinds of desire and attachment that will lead you towards Buddhahood, that will lead you towards becoming fully awakened. So yeah, like those, having a desire to attain awakening, having a desire to follow the Buddha's instructions, that's all really, really wholesome. That's actually what makes Buddhist practice function. So we're cultivating those kinds of wholesome desires. We're not necessarily eliminating all desire right from the start. Rather, what we're doing is we're replacing harmful desires with wholesome desires.
Okay, lots of questions. Let's see if we can get through all of them. Yudi says, I'm dating someone with narcissistic traits. Everybody says run because they have no empathy. As a Buddhist, how can I treat this being who might not be human but is suffering? Dante?
Break up with them.
Wow. Okay.
And let's be realistic. If you're already seeing that the person has like serious personality traits which include a lack of empathy for you, that's a gigantic problem, isn't it? Compassion doesn't mean that you need to stay with someone who treats you badly. You can have compassion for them from a safe distance.
Okay, thank you, Bante. And Sud has a follow-up from this morning's sutta study. With respect to the Viper Sutta, what causes someone to be complacent? I feel like I'm motivated to practice until I fall into daily life and forget, until of course I'm reminded to practice. Is forgetfulness the same as ignorance or aspect of ignorance? Forgetfulness, I guess, with aspect to the fact that all this is sort of suffering, there's nibbana waiting.
I mean, it's easy to get distracted by the pleasures of life. So this kind of forgetfulness you're mentioning usually comes from having a very comfortable and easy life. So it's good to actually actively remind yourself of the drawbacks and disadvantages of things. Pay attention to the qualities of impermanence and unsatisfactoriness of your daily pleasures, so that the mind doesn't fall into fixation on them so easily.
And Amin asks, I'm scared of darkness outside at night. Any advice to overcome my fear, please?
Well, I was never scared of the dark, so I actually don't know what to say about fear of darkness. But generally speaking, as you continue your Buddhist practice, then fear disappears. Fear is a product of defilement and delusion. So as your practice develops, then your fears will disappear. One of the most direct ways is to cultivate metta. So when the mind is full of metta, then there is no fear.
And Jang says, when we meditate, are we supposed to focus on you are not the body or the mind is not you?
I mean, those are examples of the practice of anatta sanya. So recognizing this body is not me, these feelings are not me, these thoughts are not me, and so on. That is one way to practice meditation, yes.
And Amaranta asks, Bante, in the sutta, the simile of the vipers, the sixth murder, the light and lust, are these of the same nature of the five aggregates?
What do you mean by the same nature? They're the same nature in that they are sankharas. But otherwise, what do you mean by same nature?
Okay. And Jang says, when we meditate, I feel pain in the body. Are we supposed to focus on it? I'm passing them on to him because you're fast.
Short answers. That's one way to deal with pain, is to focus your attention on it with curiosity and acceptance. And then the pain will no longer be bothersome for you.
Excellent. And Joe asks, may I request the chanting of the Mahajayamangala Sutta in gratitude for the practices of the entire Empty Cloud community, both lay and monastic? Sadhu. Very kind. And oh, that was it. I thought there were more. That's why.
Okay. Well, still, it's almost 9, so I think it's fine.
Anyone at the end of time says these are the heavenly messengers of anicca.
Yeah, that's actually quite true.
Yeah.
Actually, in the suttas, at one point when the Buddha is talking about the dangers of attachment to possessions, one of the things he mentions is to consider that thieves might take it away. So fire might burn it, water might damage it, thieves might take it away, disliked heirs might inherit it. Like, there's actually a whole list, and one of them is thieves stealing. This is the drawback of attachment to physical possessions.
Amaranta, I think, is explaining a little bit more. Are naturally biologically born with us? If that is the case, is almost like hardwired in us.
What was this in reference to?
Where is it? I can't find it anymore. The sixth murder, delight and lust.
I mean, we've had delight and lust in the mind since beginningless time. So it has literally always been an aspect of our subconscious since literally forever. Fortunately, like everything else, delight and lust are impermanent and impersonal, which means that with Buddhist practice, we can eliminate them from the mind.
Isn't it wonderful news?
Yeah.
Great. So I think we can end on that note of the good news of Buddhism with 3 sadhus. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.
And if you're in the area, you're welcome to join us for our weekend programs. So Saturday evening meditation and then Sunday all day here at the monastery.